Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. So with the transfer window closed last night and the kick-off of the Premier League season just hours away with Manchester United playing Leicester at Old Trafford at 8 o'clock tonight, I think it's about time that I gave you guys what I think is going to be the full Premier League table come the final day of the season, including who I think is going to win this season's title race, whether I think Man City can defend their crown or whether I think Liverpool can finally end their near 3-decade wait for a Premier League title. So starting off at the bottom where absolutely nobody wants to be come that final day in May, I think in 20th place I'm going to go for Cardiff because I just think they play an awful brand of football, and I think while they might have good players, they must have had good players to get them up. They finished second in the Championship last season, but I just think the negative style that they play, it might work in the Championship where you can sort of exploit the low quality of the team against you and then just hit them on the break. In the Premier League, you will get found out. You can't give that many chances away, and I feel like bits that they would have got away with in the Championship, they absolutely won't in the Premier League. And I just think Warnock has a bit of a track record when it comes to the Premier League, and it just seems like he never really is capable of handling the pressure. And I think it does just come down to that thing that his style of football, pardon me, it's great for the Championship, it will get you promoted, but when it comes to the Premier League, it's just never going to work, and it does feel like he often crumbles. So that is why I think Cardiff will really, really struggle this season, and I think they'll finish rock bottom of the Premier League table. And then above them, it's Brighton, a team that I like for many reasons. They do play nice football. They're fairly new to the league as well. They have a nice ground and stuff like that. They have a nice area. It's probably very lovely to go for away days at Brighton. But I just think they did get away with it a little bit last season. There were quite a few teams that I felt survived almost by coincidence, by the fact that there were other teams that somehow managed to be worse than them. And I think while Brighton have got a little bit of goals there, they've got Glenn Murray, so they've got a goal scorer, I just feel like they don't really win enough games, and when they are up against it, they do struggle to get back into matches. So I think, especially if they start badly, if they don't get enough points on the board early on, I do worry that they could just stay there and they won't be able to build up any momentum. So I think Brighton will finish 19th. And then rounding off the relegation zone in 18th place, I reckon it's going to be Southampton. They survived by the absolute skin of their teeth last season. And if you ask me, they probably should have sacked Mark Hughes because they are, out of all those teams that, like I said, survived by coincidence, they are the ultimate example of that. They were absolutely terrible, especially in the second half of last season. They couldn't get a goal for love nor money, and it really did feel like it was just by virtue of the fact that when it came to that crunch match between them and Swansea, they got a very scrappy goal, and Swansea just weren't good enough to get back at them. So I really do feel like they got away with it last season. I think they should have got rid of Mark Hughes because I think he really wasn't taking the club anywhere. He arguably actually made them worse from where he arrived at the club. So, especially with their recruitment so far this summer, they haven't really brought in any big names, and I feel like their squad has dwindled over the years. They've always been a club that's famed for bringing in new talent, but when I look at the squad they've got now, the actual amount of quality players in there is much lower than it used to be, and they are no longer near the side that was finishing in the top half of the Premier League anymore, and I do think they are probably going to get relegated this season. So then in 17th, the team that I think will survive by the skin of their teeth this time, that will just scrape away from the relegation zone, is Newcastle United. I feel like this is going to be a really, really difficult season for them. It hasn't been the best transfer window. Everybody knows about that. There's huge tensions between Rafa Benitez and the board as well, which, Rafa Benitez, as Liverpool fans, we all know is no stranger to whatsoever. So I feel like this is going to be a very difficult season for them. But when you look at how well they did last season, and they weren't exactly in a much better position, they came 10th. And when you look at the table from the second half of the season, I think they might even come 6th or 7th or something like that. So I do feel like no matter how bad things get for Newcastle, Rafa Benitez is a good enough manager. He is one of the top managers in the world, that he will be able to just get them out of things alive. So then in 16th, another team that I feel like will just about get through is Huddersfield. I feel like, again, like last season, they might flirt with relegation a little bit. And last season, they did have an advantage where they they started very well. They pulled themselves away from the relegation battle early on, so it only really started to affect them very late on in the season, and that's where we really got to see their fighting spirit. You know, we got to see the Huddersfield we'd seen earlier on in the season that did sometimes struggle for wins and especially struggle for goals. You know, they scored a very low total, something like 25 goals or something like that last season, which is ridiculous for a 38-game season. So I think they will struggle at various points this season. Like I said, they'll flirt with that relegation zone and stuff like that. But if what they did at the very end of last season is anything to go by, I feel like there's some fighting spirit and a real team spirit there that will get them over the line, which is nice because as Liverpool fans, I think we all like Huddersfield and their manager. So in 15th, I think Watford are going to finish in the lower part of the Premier League table. I feel like this is probably going to be a poor season for them. You know, the bubble is probably going to burst around about now. They've done pretty well considering how much they chop and change managers. You know, changing your manager that often is pretty much suicide at that level of the Premier League table, but Watford have done pretty well because of it. I do feel like now, like I said, the bubble's starting to burst. Steam is starting to run out in the Watford project, but I think the fact that they have such a good squad there, you know, it's not an amazing squad, but there are Premier League quality players all over the pitch there. I feel like that is good enough to, you know, not necessarily keep them away from a relegation battle, but it should see them survive fairly comfortably come the end of the season. And then in 14th, I think it's going to be Crystal Palace. You know, they're a side that Liverpool fans, we don't really like. We absolutely hate playing against them. Their manager is someone who we don't have a great history with. Let's be honest, Roy Hodgson, I feel like with Hodgson as manager, you're never going to get anything special. I can't see Palace finishing too high in the league. It remains to be seen whether Wilf Zaha will go. Like I said, the window is closed now, but I'm recording this video about 24 hours before it closes, so something could develop there. But with or without Zaha, I can't see them doing anything amazing, but it's a similar thing to Watford, where despite the fact they haven't got a great manager, and I can't see anything special happening for them this season, they've got a really quality squad there. You know, the amount of money they've invested in it, they've got pretty good players all over the pitch, so I feel like that alone will be good enough to keep them up. So next up, in 13th place, you've got Wolves. Now, I feel like this is going to be a difficult season for them, as it is for any promoted side, and they have got an inexperienced coach as well. You know, he's someone who has very little experience in the English game and absolutely no experience in the Premier League, but I feel like they play some very nice football. They played some great football in the Championship last season, and while that has sometimes been the undoing of promoted teams, you know, Blackpool are a great example of that. I feel like they racked up so many points in the Championship last season that they just know how to win, and to get that many points, you don't just win easy games. They've probably won ugly on a fair few occasions as well, so I think, you know, when it comes to it, it might get difficult at times, but the fact they play good football, the fact that they seem to have a good system going there and a good bond between player and manager and stuff like that means that I think they will be able to shift themselves away from the relegation zone and just get enough wins to finish comfortably around about mid-table in 13th place. And then in 12th, I reckon it's going to be Burnley. You know, this is going to be a real test for them this season. I think Europe is going to cause them a lot of problems, as it always does for teams, especially teams like Burnley. You know, we saw with Everton last season, as much as they made a lot of signings, they struggled hugely with their squad depth, and it causes you a lot of problems with those Europa League games, especially the ones away from home. So I think Burnley, I can't really see them doing as well as last season. It's interesting that, you know, I've put them in 12th, and when you take the table from the second half of last season, I'm pretty sure that's where they actually finished. So they did tail off a little bit towards the end of last season. However, Sean Dyche is a good manager. You know, he knows how to shut up shop for one thing. So if Burnley do start getting up against it, if they do start struggling, I can't see them getting anywhere near the relegation zone. You know, I think they are smart enough, they are pragmatic enough to avoid getting anywhere near that end of the table. And I think the signing of Ben Gibson will help as well, because their strength has always been in good centre-back pairings, and there was a worry going into this season that because of the amount of games they play, squad rotation would mean that that pairing would be broken up and they would end up struggling because of it. But just bringing in a third centre-back who's probably around the same quality as Ben Mee and James Tarkowski just means they've kind of got a three-man rotation thing there, where as long as they all gel together, they should still be doing all right, and I think they'll finish 12th, comfortably away from the relegation places, but not quite as good as they did last season. And then in 11th, rounding off the bottom half of the table, I reckon it's going to be Leicester. You know, they've got a really solid squad. They've got a steady manager. Again, like Crystal Palace, can't see anything spectacular happening with them. They've sort of become like a microcosm, not a microcosm, but like a smaller scale version of the Leicester team that won the league. You know, they're not like taking on all comers. They're not winning every week or anything like that, but they still do the basics of what they did in that season very well. They defend well. They are very sort of compact, defensively sound, steady, like I said, like their manager, and they do get some nice goals on the counter-attack with players like Jamie Vardy in the team as well. So nothing spectacular in the pipeline for Leicester this season, I don't think, but I can see them getting a comfortable 11th place finish. So looking at the top half places now, getting closer and closer to that business end of the season where we hoped Liverpool will be finding themselves at the end of May. I think in 10th place, it's probably going to be Fulham. You know, they remind me of Bournemouth when they first arrived on the scene in the Premier League, really. You know, again, like Wolves, they play nice football. Unlike Bournemouth in that first season, though, they've made a lot of solid signings as well. You know, when you look at the players that have come in, Jean-Michel Seri, Andre Schürrle, Alfie Mawson might be a really solid player for them as well. They've brought in some players that have got Premier League experience there. They've brought in some young prospects as well. They've got players like Ryan Sessegnon as well, who are up-and-coming players, who it's going to be really interesting to see how they get along in the Premier League. I feel like it might take a few months with Fulham, as it does with any promoted side. You know, there might be a few moments where people do look at them and worry that they could get sucked into a relegation battle at some point. But I think as they go along, they will get better and better. And I feel like a top half finish should really be the target for them. And I get the feeling that they're going to get it with a 10th placed finish. And then in 9th, speaking of Bournemouth, I think that's where they're going to finish. They've become Premier League regulars now. And I think their style of football is just really good at that area of the table, because while it can sort of bite you on the bum in the games against the huge sides, they will probably get walloped a couple of times this season. They do occasionally lose like 4 or 5-0 to the big teams. But on the flip side of that, sometimes they get wins against the big teams as well. And because they're attacking, because they play a kind of free-flowing, offensive style of football, it does mean that when they're up against the teams that they're expected to get wins against, you know, the teams from the bottom half of the table, they get enough sets of 3 points that they can finish higher and higher up the table every year. So I think Bournemouth are going to finish in 9th place. And then in 8th place, I reckon it's going to be West Ham. You know, a team that really I think they look like they're trying to challenge the top 6 with the way that they've brought in a top quality manager. They've invested once again a lot of money into the squad. It's interesting really to think about where that money's coming from at the moment, but that's a totally different matter altogether. But I feel like they are going to try and break into the top 6, but I think it's going to be difficult for them, as it always is for a team, because there is always going to be a gap between things like squad depth as well and just the kind of mentalities that those big 6 teams have. So West Ham might not get that far, but I think 8th place would represent a very good finish for them this season. Like I said, they've bought well, they've got a quality manager, and they will be aiming for that kind of end of the table. And then rounding off the teams outside of the top 6, I think in 7th place it's going to be Everton. I think Silva will definitely revitalise them. You know, he's a manager that they've wanted for a while, so clearly they know what they're getting and they know that he's the manager that they want to turn the club around, and I feel like that's probably what he'll end up doing. You know, I feel like they're probably going to end up being nearly men this season. I think it's probably going to be a lot like Martinez's first season. You know, maybe instead of when they nearly finished in the Champions League places and just ended up in 5th on the last day, Everton will probably be trying to sneak into the top 6 and just fall short as the season comes to an end. But I feel like this could end up being a really positive season for Everton. You know, it could be the complete flip side. A lot of people said that last summer and it ended up going completely balls up for them at the end of the day. So you never really know. But I feel like this is their best shot yet at really not getting into the top 6, but putting some pressure on them. So speaking of the top 6, this is where it really gets interesting. In 6th place, having to settle for Europa League football, and Liverpool fans will be massively pleased to hear this, I think is going to be Manchester United. You know, they're just in such a terrible position at the moment. Mourinho is burning bridges left, right and centre. The players just look disinterested as well. You know, as Liverpool fans, we got to look at them when they played against us in pre-season, and there were no positive signs there whatsoever, apart from maybe a good individual performance from Andreas Pereira. It just looks like the players have absolutely had enough of playing Mourinho-style football, and obviously we haven't seen a lot of the World Cup players come back, so things could change as their first teamers come in, come in, and I don't think it's going to be as disastrous as maybe people think it will be. I don't think they're going to completely implode like maybe Chelsea did in Mourinho's third season, but I can't see them really finishing in the top 4 places at all. And I think, if I'm honest, 6th is potentially even generous, because like I said, there is every chance that they could just completely implode at some point this season. So then in 5th, narrowly missing out on the Champions League places, I think is going to be Tottenham Hotspur. I feel like they've had a rough summer of it, and a lot of it is down to that new stadium. You know, they haven't really had the funds to bolster their squad. They've had to just settle for tying down the current players to contracts, which is a good move and will probably help them going forward. And I feel like breaking their wage barrier as well is a great move for them, because that was something that I think was holding them back from attracting absolute top talents. But I just think with the new stadium move, like I said, it's affected their ability to recruit, so it's hard to see them really improving on last season. And I just think everyone always struggles with a new stadium. It always takes a little bit of a while to settle in, so they might start badly and then gather a little bit of momentum, but I just can't really see them challenging in the very upper echelons of the Premier League this season. But I think 5th place for Tottenham this season with a new stadium and the summer they've had is by no means a disaster. So the top 4, the place where it really gets interesting, the place where every team wants to be. I think in 4th place, it's going to be Arsenal. You know, they've still got gaps in the squad. They've bought well this summer. They seem to have bought pragmatically, and that's something that I think will become a symbol of Arsenal this season. Emery is a very pragmatic manager. He's very competent as well. So I feel like while they have gaps in their squad, they could end up being a little bit like Liverpool in the 16-17 season. Certainly Liverpool in the second half of that season, where we did have some injury problems. There were clear issues with the side. There were clear places in the team that just weren't working, and players that were square pegs in round holes and stuff like that. But we just managed to get ourselves over the line by winning in a pragmatic manner. And so I feel like Arsenal won't really get anywhere near the title. This is, at the end of the day, a transitional season for them. But I think the Big Six won't be as good this season as it was last season or even the season before. I think a lot of the teams will start to drop off, and I feel like the fact that I'm anticipating Tottenham and United will struggle to get into the top 4 really does open the door for Arsenal. And I feel like if Emery can just get them playing and getting them winning enough games, then they will comfortably finish in 4th place. But I can't see them challenging for the title just yet. And then in 3rd place, I think it's going to be Chelsea. I think they are going to be definitely slow starters. You know, we saw in the Community Shield that they are really struggling to adapt to Sarri's style of play at the moment. It is a huge shift from what Antonio Conte was giving them at the team. And I feel like it's the kind of style of play that does take a while to embed. It's not like Antonio Conte's, where after about 5 games, Chelsea suddenly clicked and just stormed the league from there on in. It's the kind of style of play that will probably take potentially up to 18 months to fully drill into the side. So I can't see them necessarily challenging for the title this season. I think they also have a problem in terms of lacking top quality attackers. I think as we go on and as they gel into the Sarri system, that will stop becoming a problem, because the system will score goals more than the players do. But I think that will set them back earlier on in the season. So I can't really see them challenging for the title, but I think as they go on, they will progress, they will get better, and they will finish as best of the rest in 3rd place. And then the title race, the big one. Can Liverpool do it? If you ask me, yeah, I think they can. I think Liverpool will win the league this season. Fingers crossed, everything crossed. It's what we all want to see. But I feel like it's more likely this season than it ever has been in the almost 3 decades since we last won it. You know, we've got a fantastic platform to start off with. I mentioned in the West Ham game, we played right before Man City. If we get 3 points in that game and then they go to the Emirates, that's already a difficult situation for them to be put in. So I feel like the fixture list that Liverpool have got at the start, barring that double header against Chelsea away and then Man City at home, which is going to be a difficult couple of games, we've got a chance to really lay a marker down early on and set the pace in the title race, because that's something that Man City did so well last season. They set the pace at a point that no one else could catch them. And I'm not saying we'll do that, because Man City are good and they'll probably be able to keep up with us. But it is important that we establish ourselves as title challengers early on, because if you do that in the first few games, then it makes it so much easier to carry it through as the season goes along. So I feel like City could struggle with that pressure as well. You know, we haven't really seen them under the pressure of a title race yet. They did absolutely walk it last season. They didn't really have any problems in the league whatsoever. Like I said, once they ran away with it early on, once they established that almost unassailable lead, they were pretty much fine to just cruise to the title from there on in. So I feel like as long as Liverpool challenge, and I'm expecting them to do so in those first few months, I think City could end up crumbling, because the only time we really saw them under pressure last season was when they played Liverpool in the Champions League, and they absolutely crumbled there. So I can see them struggling. I think Liverpool as well have no Achilles heel at the moment. Certainly not any weakness that stands out as something that's going to cause them a major problem this season. The goalkeeper issue has hopefully been fixed with Alisson, or at least has been fixed to the point where it's not a glaring issue with Liverpool anymore. Even if Alisson isn't quite as good as we'd hoped, he's certainly going to be a lot better than what we've had in the past. The defence is so much better. It performed excellently in the second half of last season. They have recruited very well in midfield as well, so they've got some great depth there. They've got added depth in attack, and those players that were great last season are only going to get better. So I feel like Liverpool are just fantastically placed here, especially because I can almost see Man City actually pushing more for the Champions League this season. It's a trophy that I think Guardiola was disappointed to go out to Liverpool in the quarter-final stage last season. I think he's disappointed that it's something like 7 or 8 years since he last won it. The last time he lifted the Champions League trophy was back in 2011 with Barcelona. I feel like that's the next step for him at Man City. So if he's stuck in a title race in April and he's also got a Champions League semi-final to contend with, I feel like he might actually prioritise the semi-final. And, City have got a good enough squad that prioritising almost isn't a thing. They've got the depth there that they can field great 11s in both games, if they have a midweek Champions League game and a weekend crunch Premier League tie. But I just feel like mentally the focus will be shifting towards the Champions League, and it just opens the door up for Liverpool. And like I said, with our squad having no Achilles heel and with the fantastic vibe that all of us have been talking about, there's a really great feeling of optimism all around Liverpool at the moment, with the players, with the staff and with the fans as well. I feel like it comes down to a quote, and I can't remember where I heard it, but it's a really good point. Liverpool will not be ready to win the league on the pitch until they are ready off it. And we look absolutely sorted off the pitch to win the Premier League. So the only thing now is to get those results on the pitch. So yeah, those are my complete Premier League predictions for the season. Hopefully that is how it turns out on the last day in May, because if it does, then Liverpool will finally be lifting the Premier League title. If you do disagree with what I've said, let me know down in the comments below how you think things are going to turn out. Apart from that, thank you guys very much for watching. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days as well. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back soon with the post-match content after we have hopefully walloped West Ham on our first game of the season. Bye for now.